Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are undertaking a truly expansive journey into the heart of the modern psychedelic renaissance.
It's a huge topic and one that's moving so fast.
It really is. And our map for this exploration is Michael Pollan's monumental work, How to Change Your Mind.
Right.
And this book, it really looks at molecules like psilocybin and LSD.
Right.
Not through the lens you'd expect.
No, not at all. It's not about the moral panic, not really about the counterculture, though. That's part of the history.
It's through the hard-won data of, scientific research. We're asking how these substances are suddenly being viewed as these powerful tools for tackling, everything.
Everything from existential distress to treatment-resistant addiction. Yeah.
It's a remarkable story, isn't it?
It is. And I think the reason Pollan's book resonated so widely is that it combines this really rigorous history and science with a deeply personal narrative.
His own journey.
His own journey. He starts, and I think this is quite deliberate, as the comfortable skeptic.
The quintessential materialist, yeah.
Exactly. He talks about having a history of anxiety, a deep-seated worry about losing control. He even says he was running along deep but comfortable grooves in his settled life.
I found that description so relatable.
Me too.
The idea that you don't necessarily feel, unhappy, but your mental processes are they're stuck.
In a loop?
A predictable, repetitive loop. He wasn't looking for some radical life change, but he was fascinated by the data.
The data that was starting to trickle out of places like Johns Hopkins.
Right. And this idea that a single guided session could potentially offer a tool for understanding and disrupting those entrenched habits.
To shine a fresh light on what he calls this old world of consciousness.
It was too compelling to ignore, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And his investigation, it's driven by intellectual curiosity, not evangelism.
That's a key point.
It lends immense credibility to his reporting. He's looking at this scientific revival and asking a very simple question. How could something banned decades ago for being dangerous now be reliably dissolving lifelong fears of death or addiction?
To answer that, you have to go back.
You have to recognize the sheer drama of its early history. I mean, it went from being this miraculous discovery to a cultural threat almost overnight.
That's right. So before we unpack the neurobiology, which is fascinating, we need to trace the trajectory of how these powerful compounds first entered the Western consciousness.
And it starts, maybe surprisingly, in a lab.
It starts with an accidental discovery that launched the entire field.
The story begins in a laboratory in Basel, Switzerland, specifically in 1943.
Okay.
There's a Swiss chemist, Albert Hofmann, working for Sandoz Pharmaceuticals.
Right.
And he was synthesizing derivatives of ergot, which is a fungus that grows on rye.
Taliceps buccurea, I believe.
That's the one. But he wasn't looking for mind-altering substances, not at all. He was looking for a circulatory and respiratory stimulant.
So a totally different medical application.
Completely. And he synthesizes this compound lysergic acid dihelamide, LSD-25. He puts it aside. He deems it uninteresting.
And that's it.
For a while. He only returns to it 5 years later, and he says he felt this strange intuition.
A hunch.
A hunch. And during that second synthesis, he accidentally ingested a minute amount.
And that was it?
That began the world's first acid trip.
What did he say about it?
He described his experience as a not unpleasant intoxicated-like condition, but noted its immense power. He later called LSD his problem child.
His problem child.
Yeah, but he remained convinced of its potential value, especially in psychiatry. He thought it offered a chemical model for schizophrenia.
So a way to study psychosis in a controlled way.
Exactly. Now, compare that very sterile laboratory discovery with the second major compound, psilocybin.
Which is a whole different story.
A completely different origin. It was ancient, used sacramentally for millennia by the Aztecs under the name Teonacatl.
The flesh of the gods.
The flesh of the gods. And this practice, it was violently driven underground by the Spanish conquistadors and the church. It only survived in these very remote areas of Mexico.
So how did it re-enter the Western world?
Through a completely improbable figure, R. Gordon Wasson.
And he wasn't a scientist, was he?
Not even close. He was a highly respected Manhattan banker.
The banker.
And an amateur mycologist who studied fungal folklore. So mushrooms were his hobby.
Wow.
In 1955, Wasson sampled the mushrooms during a velada ceremony in Oaxaca, led by the curandera Maria Sabina.
And that experience must have been profound.
So profound that 2 years later, he publishes this huge 15-page article in Life magazine.
In Life magazine, that's as mainstream as it gets.
Absolutely. The title was Seeking the Magic Mushroom, and it introduced the modern public to this completely new, profound form of consciousness that wasn't, just intoxication in the traditional sense.
And that phrase, magic mushrooms, that came from the article.
Well, it's an important historical nugget that the phrase was actually coined by a Time Life headline writer.
Huh.
It wasn't a counterculture figure. It was an editor in a suit in Manhattan.
And this article basically launched what we now look back on as the golden age of psychedelic research in the 50s and early 60s.
It did. Suddenly, LSD was viewed by many, especially in the psychiatric community, as a near-miracle cure.
For what, specifically?
One of the most successful early applications was treating chronic alcohol addiction.
Which is notoriously difficult to treat.
Extremely. The premise was fascinating. Researchers like Humphrey Osmond and Abram Hoffer in Saskatchewan, Canada.
Saskatchewan.
Yeah, of all places. They hypothesized that a single high-dose LSD session could mimic the terrifying but often transformative experience of delirium tremens.
The DTs.
Right. They thought it could potentially shock the alcoholic into sobriety by providing a profound spiritual experience, something that would just completely redefine their priorities.
Did it work?
Their results were statistically remarkable for the time. They treated over 700 alcoholics, and roughly half achieved sustained sobriety for 6 months or longer.
That's incredible.
It was. The Saskatchewan government eventually integrated LSD therapy into standard treatment protocols.
Oh, but maybe the most enduring and important program was operating kind of under the radar in the U.S., wasn't it?
That would be the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center at Spring Grove State Hospital.
Right.
And this wasn't some rogue lab. I mean, this was an ambitious, government-funded research program.
That was legitimate.
Very. And it continued robustly until 1977. They worked across a variety of disorders. Anxiety in cancer patients, personality disorders, alcoholism.
And crucially, their protocols.
Their protocols prefigure nearly every single element of the research being conducted today. At Hopkins, at NYU, they're basically dusting off the Spring Grove playbook.
I think the defining aspect of that program, the thing that really speaks volumes about the ethos of those early researchers.
What's that?
Is that new staff members, including the clinician Bill Richards, who's still active today,
Right.
they were required to take a couple of LSD sessions as part of their training.
That's an amazing detail.
Isn't it? They understood that to guide a patient through such a profound internal world, the therapist had to have walked that road themselves.
You had to have a map of the territory.
Exactly. So this rigorous professional research climate, it just completely collapsed. Why?
Due to one factor, really. Popularization in politics.
Timothy Leary.
Timothy Leary. After his own transformative mushroom experience in Mexico, he became this charismatic figure who took the substances out of the clinic and into the counterculture.
And he coined that famous mantra.
Turn on, tune in, drop out.
Leary's enthusiasm it was.
Yeah.
It was ultimately detrimental to the whole scientific effort, wasn't it?
Deeply. While he was inspirational to many, his work often lacked methodological rigor.
Pollan points out the famous Concord prison experiment.
Right, where Leary claimed these massive reductions in recidivism among prisoners who took psilocybin.
And the numbers seemed incredible.
They did. But when Rick Doblin at MAPS later painstakingly reviewed the data, he found that Leary had grossly exaggerated the findings. He'd selected for successful outcomes, ignored the controls. It just didn't hold up.
So his popularization coupled with this shift in the cultural mood.
It caused an immediate and massive public backlash.
LSD went from being a psychiatric tool
to a symbol of social upheaval and mental instability. The media ran these sensational stories, sparking a full-on moral panic.
We saw those headlines like, "A monster in our midst, a drug called LSD."
Exactly. And even medically discredited urban legends, like the one claiming LSD damaged chromosomes.
That one gained terrifying traction.
It did. The fear was then codified into law in 1970 with the Controlled Substances Act.
And that was the nail in the coffin.
It was. LSD and psilocybin were placed in Schedule I, which is defined as having a high potential for abuse and, critically,
no recognized medical use.
Right. That one phrase effectively erased decades of promising research and forced the entire field into a 4-decade-long scientific hibernation.
Until, really, the early 2000s.
The scientific revival began with a series of critical watershed events, all clustered around 2006.
Okay, what happened in 2006?
The first and most significant thing was the publication of the Johns Hopkins paper, led by Roland Griffiths.
Right.
They demonstrated in a very rigorous way that psilocybin could reliably and safely occasion what the participants rated as a mystical experience.
And that this experience had lasting, positive psychological effects.
Exactly. That paper was seismic.
Why? What made it so important?
Because it dared to use the word mystical in a hard science context. It showed that a drug experience could be rated by participants as one of the most meaningful of their entire lives.
Comparable only to the birth of a child or the death of a parent.
Yeah. It legitimized the whole approach for a new generation of researchers.
And at the same time, there were other shifts happening.
Simultaneously, yeah, we saw legal and regulatory shifts. In 2006, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that the Union du Vegetal, or UDV, a small religious sect, could import and use ayahuasca.
Which contains DMT, another Schedule I substance.
Right. They could use it as a sacrament under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This decision was key because it acknowledged a legitimate, structured, ceremonial use case.
And the third piece was the FDA itself.
Exactly. The FDA signaled a change in administrative attitude. Rick Strassman had previously secured approval for a DMT trial back in the 90s, which showed the door was already cracked open.
So by 2006, you have this convergence.
You have proven safety, strong academic methodology, and regulatory receptivity. All of that meant that serious, rigorous science could finally begin again.
And this time, it was focused on specific, measurable disorders.
The modern Renaissance is defined by its methodological rigor. The whole point is ensuring that the mistakes and the lack of structure from the 1960s are not repeated.
And the centers for this revival are pretty clear.
Absolutely. Institutions like Johns Hopkins, NYU, UCLA, and Imperial College London have really established themselves as the hubs.
And what immediately jumps out when you look at their work is the specific selection of therapeutic targets.
Mm-hmm.
They're largely focused on disorders characterized by, rigidity.
Rigidity and rumination, the feeling of being mentally, emotionally, or behaviorally stuck.
Right. So if the goal is to reboot the system, you target the patients whose systems are the most entrenched.
That's the logic exactly. And the earliest groundbreaking work focused on patients facing the most rigid mental wall imaginable.
Existential distress in terminal cancer patients.
Right. These are individuals grappling with profound anxiety and depression rooted in the certainty of imminent death.
And the researchers were hoping that a single high-dose psilocybin session might provide some kind of shift in perspective.
A shift is an understatement. The results were revolutionary.
How so?
Volunteers facing terminal diagnoses reported these profound reconceptions of their illness and the prospect of dying. Many, not all, but a significant number reported a complete dissolution of their fear of death.
A complete dissolution.
Yeah. They often interpreted the experience as a window onto an afterlife or a different plane of existence. It fundamentally changed their worldview in a single afternoon.
There's the case of Patrick Metz, the NYU volunteer.
A powerful story. He described the start of his session like a violent space shuttle launch, just full of clunky, unpleasant energy,
Oh, man.
and then it gave way to the serenity of weightlessness. He had a profound experience of birth and death, and 2 months after his journey.
And he's still dying of cancer at this point.
He is slowly dying, yes, but he reported being the happiest in his life.
Wow.
This sustained peace, derived from a single session, it just speaks volumes about the depth of the insight he gained.
That profound shift in perspective, moving from the terror of personal annihilation to a sense of being part of something larger.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes this applicable beyond just end-of-life care, right?
Mm-hmm.
If this mechanism can break the rigidity of death anxiety.
Does that same mechanism apply to the mental rigidity we see in addiction?
Exactly.
It does, and the data is proving it out. Researchers are seeing stunning results treating nicotine, alcohol, and cocaine addiction.
The smoking cessation study at Hopkins, for instance.
That pilot study achieved an 80% success rate.
80%. That is an unprecedented level of efficacy for any psychiatric intervention.
It's unheard of. And this success isn't entirely new. It really echoes the historical data from the 50s.
The Saskatchewan studies.
Right. A 2012 meta-analysis confirmed that a single dose of LSD had a robust beneficial effect on alcohol misuse lasting up to 6 months. The old data was right.
And we also have to mention the impressive results for MDMA in treating post-traumatic stress disorder.
We do. Now, it's important to note, MDMA is an empathogen, not a classical psychedelic.
So its mechanism is slightly different.
A little different. It creates this immense sense of trust and safety.
Yeah.
But the goal is similar, to allow the rigid, fearful brain to finally process previously inaccessible trauma.
One of the guides in Pollan's book observed that MDMA can condense years of psychotherapy into an afternoon.
It's an incredible claim, but it's what the data is starting to show.
So all of this leads us to this critical philosophical tension at the core of the modern framework.
Which researchers like Charles Grob and Sidney Cohen unapologetically call applied mysticism.
Applied mysticism. I love that term.
Me too. The key hypothesis here is that the therapeutic mechanism is not the direct chemical effect on mood.
It's not just a happy pill.
Not at all. It's the non-ordinary mental experience itself. It's the temporary ego dissolution and the mystical state that follows.
That is so radical for secular medicine to accept, that the spiritual nature of an experience is the cure.
It completely blurs the line between religion and science, sickness and health.
I mean, if the medical community accepts that a chemically induced experience of unity and profound meaning is what heals,
it fundamentally changes how we view mental illness and what tools are acceptable to treat it.
so the clinical framework, it has to be incredibly intensive and carefully controlled.
It has to be. It's not just about taking a pill. It's a synthesis of hard neuroscience, understanding the brain and deep psychotherapy, guiding the patient's mind through that altered landscape.
And the therapists, they don't shy away from this. Jeffrey Gus at NYU, he openly primes the patient.
He does. He says the medicine will help them gain insight into themselves and come to learn about the meaning of life and existence.
The intention is set incredibly high right from the outset.
It is. Which brings us to the brain itself. To understand the mechanism, we really need to talk about the neural architecture.
Specifically, the default mode network, or DMN.
Right, and modern fMRI technology has been absolutely essential in allowing researchers to see what's actually happening in the brain during a psychedelic session.
So what is the DMN? How would you describe it?
The DMN is essentially the brain's internal autopilot system.
Okay.
It's a highly interconnected set of structures, like the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex, that we could only identify with modern imaging.
And what's its primary job?
Its primary job is self-referential thought. It's responsible for future planning, moral judgment, and crucially, rumination.
That constant, ceaseless internal voice. The narrator.
The narrator in your head. It is the neural foundation of our narrative identity, the voice that is constantly commenting, interpreting, labeling, and defending the I.
It's our ego, in a neurological sense.
Pretty much. The neuroscientist David Nutt, who's been instrumental in this research, puts it very starkly. He calls the DMN the neural correlate for repression.
Repression, that's a strong word.
It is, but that analogy is highly useful because the DMN typically exerts an inhibitory repressive influence on other, more ancient emotional centers of the brain.
Like the limbic system.
Like the limbic system. It keeps the mind constrained within a familiar, predictable box.
The deep but comfortable grooves that Pollan talked about.
Exactly those. So when a psychedelic molecule enters the system, what happens physiologically?
Well, these are tryptamines, right? They're chemically similar to serotonin.
Right. And they primarily bind to the 5-HT2A serotonin receptors, which are highly concentrated throughout the cortex.
Why is that particular receptor so important?
The 5-HT2A receptor is a key regulator of cortical function. You can think of it as kind of a master volume knob for sensory input and information processing.
Okay.
So when the psychedelic binds to it, the DMN is temporarily downregulated.
It's quieted.
It's quieted, the conductor steps away from the podium.
And when the DMN's inhibitory grip loosens,
The rest of the orchestra is let off the leash.
and this physiological disruption is what's experienced psychologically as ego death or ego dissolution.
Precisely. The temporary loss of the sense of a separated individual self, which often gives way to that sensation of merging with nature or the universe.
Robin Carhart Harris at Imperial College, he describes the effect as disorganizing brain activity.
Yes, using the analogy that Pollan popularized, shaking the snow globe.
I love that analogy.
It's perfect. The normal, constrained patterns of thought and connectivity are suddenly broken up, suspended, and then allowed to settle in a new configuration.
In this disorganization, it's actually neurologically quantifiable, isn't it?
It is, as an increase in entropy.
Now, in physics, entropy means disorder. But in the brain,
In the brain, it means greater flexibility. When the DMN quiets down, these distinct networks, like those governing emotion, memory, and sensory perception, they become less distinct.
They start talking to each other.
They start talking to each other across boundaries they typically respect. This leads to greater flexibility and interconnectedness.
So the brain temporarily operates in a less constrained mode of cognition.
It does. And this is profoundly linked to creativity. I mean, think about it. If your brain is stuck in a low entropy state, you rely on the nearest to hand answer.
The usual habits of thought.
The low temperature search. A high entropy state generates more novelty, more diversity, and that provides the raw material for genuine creative problem solving.
This high entropy, less constrained state, it leads to one of the most intriguing hypotheses in the book.
From the researcher Alison Gopnik.
Right. That the psychedelic mind profoundly resembles the mind of a young child.
It's a brilliant connection.
It really is.
Children approach reality with this sense of astonishment. They have very few priors or preconceptions to filter their experience.
Whereas adults, we rely on our priors, our established beliefs and expectations just to navigate reality efficiently.
Exactly. Children, though, they use hotter searches for creative solutions. They are fundamentally operating in a state of diffuse attention and higher neural flexibility.
Gopnik summarized this by saying that if you want to understand what an expanded consciousness looks like, all you have to do is have tea with a 4-year-old.
Or, as she more provocatively stated, children are basically tripping all the time.
So the implication is that psychedelics briefly restore that innate high-entropy neural diversity we lose as we grow into these rigid, rule-following adults.
That's the idea. We're getting back to a more primary state of consciousness.
So the psychological fallout from this, from the temporary quieting of the DMN and this surge in neural connectivity,
is the consistent report of profound experiences of unity, insight, or transcendence.
which researchers, as we've said, use the term mystical experience to capture.
Right.
And these aren't just subjective, fuzzy feelings. Pollan details that these reports have very consistent hallmarks
Hallmarks codified long ago by the pioneering American psychologist William James.
in the varieties of religious experience.
Exactly. And if we want to understand the therapeutic power here, we have to understand these 4 hallmarks.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, there is ineffability. The experience simply cannot be put into adequate words.
The language fails.
Completely. The imagery, the feelings, the insights are so complex and multi-layered. Bill Richards, the clinician from Spring Grove,
Right.
he captured this perfectly with his analogy. We've got 5 crayons when we need 50,000 different shades.
That's a great way to put it.
Or a caveman transported to Manhattan could only report that it was big, impressive, loud. They just lack the vocabulary for skyscraper or cell phone.
Okay, so ineffability is first, but the most important element for the therapeutic success is,
The noetic quality.
what does that mean?
This is the feeling that objective truth, a deep secret of the universe, has been disclosed. It carries a profound, curious sense of authority, as James noted. This isn't just a powerful dream. The insight feels objectively true and real.
And that's why it retains its power after the drug wears off.
That's the key. That's why it's not just a fleeting high.
And the other 2 hallmarks.
They're a bit more straightforward. Transiency, meaning the experiences are temporary, they only last hours. And passivity.
Passivity.
The feeling is one of surrender, as if one is grasped and held by a superior power.
And this passivity is what the guides coach the patients on.
It is the absolute necessity of letting go of control and entrusting oneself unconditionally to whatever experience emerges.
We see the therapeutic force of this noetic quality in the patient accounts.
Absolutely. Take Amy Charnay, a volunteer in the Hopkins trial.
Right.
She was overwhelmed by intense guilt and fear during her session. She was visualizing a noose.
Terrifying.
But when her guide, Bill Richards, just simply normalized the feeling, he said, that's a very common human experience, the terrifying imagery immediately pixelated and dissolved.
Just like that.
Just like that. And it was replaced by this overwhelming sensation of freedom and interconnectedness. The truth disclosed by the guide broke the spell of her inner fear.
And then there's the philosopher Richard Boothby.
His story is incredible. He had a profoundly chaotic and terrifying session. He described it as an ecstatic catastrophe of logic where all the structures of his life just collapsed.
Sounds like a nightmare.
It did. But when he finally surrendered, when he let go, he found himself repeating a mantra that became his life's ethic.
What was it?
Nothing matters anymore. I see the point. Nothing matters at all.
Which sounds nihilistic.
It does on the surface, but this seemingly nihilistic insight transformed into an ethic of letting go of fear and expectations and giving himself fully to the present moment. The noetic quality was that nothing matters wasn't a curse, it was a liberation.
And these aren't just external reports. Pollan wove these powerful concepts into his own first-person experiences, which he recounts in great detail.
Right. In his psilocybin session, he didn't experience a total ego dissolution.
He kept an observing eye.
Exactly. He had an observer that could narrate the bizarre phenomena, but he still felt the doors of perception open widely.
And one of the most lasting images for him involved
A plant. A climbing hydrangea vine he was gazing at. In his altered state, he felt that the leaves, backed by the sun, were looking back at me.
looking back at him.
Yeah, fixing him with an utter benevolence. For that moment, he said, the fundamental disagreement between matter and spirit seemed risibility. He felt this profound connection to the subjecthood of the plant.
But the most potent lesson, the visual koan that became a lasting metaphor for him.
Involved that same vine, but how it was dealing with a steel cage.
Right.
Instead of confronting the cage with force, which Pollan immediately recognized was his default mode for solving problems, the vine simply grew around the steel structure.
It used it.
It used it to climb higher and gather more light.
It's such a powerful metaphor for changing the terms of the problem rather than confronting it head on.
Exactly. Pollan interpreted it as a lesson in flexibility and surrender, a lesson that the goal isn't always to destroy the impediment, but to flow around it and utilize it.
And that one visual insight just encapsulated the core therapeutic promise of psychedelics.
Breaking habitual mental confrontation.
Which, I mean, the intensity of these experiences forces us to confront this foundational principle.
That these are unique among drugs.
They're non-specific amplifiers.
Right. They profoundly magnify whatever's already going on both inside and outside one's head, which means the non-pharmacological variable.
Set and setting.
They are absolutely critical to determining the outcome.
Let's break that down. Set is the internal preparation.
It is. Your mental and emotional state, your expectations, your intentions that you bring into the experience.
Pollan's personal intention, for instance, was very focused.
It was. To learn whatever the journey had to teach me about myself.
So if you enter the journey with anxiety, the anxiety will be magnified.
And if you enter with deep intention, that intention will be amplified. Set is paramount.
And then setting is the external environment.
The physical and social container. And this contrast is just so stark when we look at the history.
How so?
Early uncontrolled studies where they'd give massive doses in these neutral, sterile hospital rooms without any engagement.
Those often resulted in terrifying non-therapeutic outcomes.
Yeah.
Bad trips.
Exactly. Modern trials, by contrast, use these carefully curated settings, soft lighting, nature imagery,
And music.
and carefully selected music. The music is often considered the guide's third hand.
What kind of music do they use?
Modern researchers use these playlists that rely heavily on wordless, emotionally resonant classical music.
So no lyrics to guide the narrative.
Right. A lot of Western classical, but also global and ambient music, sometimes even Gregorian chants. The point is to provide an emotional architecture for the journey without providing specific words or narratives that might interfere with the subject's own internal experience.
The importance of guidance itself was recognized really early on by figures who were operating outside the mainstream.
Like Al Hubbard, an utterly improbable pioneer.
He was a third-grade dropout, right?
Yeah.
A rum and gun runner.
An unbelievable character who became known as the Johnny Appleseed of LSD.
And he introduced an estimated 6,000 people to the drug between 1951 and 1966.
Hubbard was key because he recognized the crucial role of the guide and the environment. He established the precedents for controlled high-dose sessions. He even used LSD to facilitate creative and insight sessions for early Silicon Valley pioneers.
He understood that supervision was non-negotiable for these powerful journeys.
Absolutely. And once psychedelics were classified as Schedule I in 1970, this ethos of careful guidance was preserved by figures who risked their freedom in the psychedelic underground.
Like Leo Zeff.
A Jungian therapist. He became instrumental in codifying the ethical protocols that are still used today.
Things like strict confidentiality and absolute prohibition on sexual contact.
And the imperative that the guide must have personal experience with the medicine.
That last point, the necessity of the guide having personal experience, it's so crucial.
It stems right from that Spring Grove ethos.
It does. If the guide hasn't experienced ego dissolution themselves, how can they genuinely understand the patient's inner terror or their profound bliss.
They can't. The guide essentially has to act as both a scientific anchor and a kind of shaman, ensuring psychological safety above all else.
Their primary job is providing the flight instructions.
And the most important instruction is the concept of surrender. The patient is explicitly told, if you feel as if you are dying, melting, dissolving, exploding, going crazy, etc., go ahead.
You have to trust the process.
And let go of the ego's desperate desire to control the experience.
We see the immense value of this anchor in the account of Dinah Baser, the cancer patient.
Yes. During a terrifying phase, she visualized her fear as this black, hideous thing under her ribcage.
And her guide's hand on her arm
Acted as a physical anchor. It allowed her to confront that fear directly.
resulting in her screaming, "Get the fuck out!"
And banishing the terror. That human connection, that anchor was the key.
In fact, the blending of roles is often explicit. Pollan notes guides like Mary,
Right, who utilized ceremonial aspects, burning sage, and using a crow's wing to smudge the space.
she acted more like a shaman than a psychologist.
And that's what's so interesting. The clinical container is structured, but it's blending Western psychotherapy with these ancient ritual elements to maximize safety and depth of experience.
It's so important to stress, this work requires intense screening.
Absolutely critical. The drug is a non-specific amplifier. It is not harmless, particularly for those with pre-existing psychoses or a family history of them.
As one guide, Andre noted, you need a strong ego in order to let go of it and then be able to spring back to your boundaries.
It's a paradox. You need a healthy ego to dissolve your ego safely.
So the setting, and the screening process are the three lines of defense that ensure a therapeutic outcome over a catastrophic one.
That's the framework. And if the underlying neurobiological mechanism is the temporary disruption of the DMN and the injection of entropy,
Then the core utility is psychological.
right, interrupting the mental rigidity that characterizes so many of these modern disorders, especially depression and addiction.
This is why researchers refer to the session as a hard stop. Matt Johnson called it a reboot of the system, a biological control alt-delete.
I love that. It creates a brief, precious window of mental flexibility where these deeply entrenched maladaptive patterns of thinking can be permanently loosened or even rewired.
When you view it through this lens, addiction gets reframed.
Completely. Stephen Ross at NYU, he views it less as a simple physiological dependency and more as a spiritual disorder.
Or an addiction to a pattern of thinking with the self at the center of it.
Exactly. The perpetual self-focus and self-medication are disrupted by an experience that forces the ego to dissolve and see the bigger picture.
The perspective shift is immense.
It is.
That volunteer in the smoking cessation trial who explained that the immensity of the psilocybin experience made his habit seem irrelevant and pitifully small by comparison.
It illustrates it perfectly.
His habit just didn't fit into the new, grander context of his life.
The brain found a solution not by forcing a change, but by generating a higher-order insight that rendered the problem moot.
This psychological shift, it's powerfully facilitated by a specific emotion.
The emotion of awe. This is a key area of research, particularly by Dr. Keltner at UC Berkeley.
And he and his colleagues proposed that awe, which is reliably occasioned by psychedelics, is a fundamental human emotion that acts as an excellent antidote for egotism.
It makes sense. Awe is the emotional experience of confronting something vast that transcends your current understanding of the world.
The cosmos, nature, profound unity.
All of it. Keltner's research demonstrates that awe promotes a fundamental sense of the small self that directs our attention away from the individual to the group and the greater good.
Which is critical for healing disorders like depression, which are fundamentally characterized by this ruminative self-focus.
A depressed or addicted mind is trapped in a loop with the self at the center. Awe temporarily shatters that self-obsession.
And his studies show that people who experience awe are not only more likely to exhibit altruistic behavior,
But they literally draw smaller self-portraits after the experience.
that's amazing.
They feel reconnected to a communal reality. They shrink their ego, literally and figuratively.
And the most exciting part of this research is the durability of the effect.
This is maybe the most radical part. For the cancer patients and the addiction volunteers, a single session often yields effects that are sustained for years.
Pollan noted that even a decade or more later, the participants in the Hopkins and NYU trials still keenly felt the positive effects.
Yeah. Patrick Metz, the cancer patient, reported feeling the happiest in his life 2 months before his death.
All because he had gained a renewed focus on love and living in the present.
The insight gained wasn't just a fleeting feeling, it was a permanent restructuring of his priorities.
And patients report these tangible, lasting improvements.
Like dramatically reduced rumination, improved self-compassion.
And a sense of being reconnected to their senses. One patient noted that months later, she could still appreciate the fact that plants looked glowing, bright.
Suggesting a lingering sensory connection to the awe she experienced.
The flight instructions of trust and surrender often convert into an actionable, durable manual for living.
Right, so all these clinical successes, they present a massive challenge to the scientific and medical establishments.
How do you integrate a treatment that relies on applied mysticism, on the subjective spiritual quality of the experience, into modern Western medicine?
It's a huge problem. Modern psychiatry, as one analyst put it, has increasingly gone from being brainless to being mindless.
What does that mean?
It means focusing strictly on biochemistry and symptom management via medication, while neglecting the deep subjective and spiritual dimensions of suffering. The medical community struggles to accept that the experience itself, not just the chemical imbalance, is the cure.
And yet, despite these philosophical hurdles, the regulatory success has been impressive.
It has. The FDA was so impressed by the phase 2 data on cancer patients that they actually asked the researchers to expand their focus.
To the much larger problem of depression in the general population.
Which was a surreal pivot for the research community. They initially targeted the dying population precisely because they thought it would be the easiest path to regulatory approval for a Schedule I substance.
So this expansion forces us to confront Pollan's central philosophical dilemma.
How can we credit an intense drug-induced vision if the experience is chemically generated? How can it carry the authority of objective truth?
It's a great question.
And Pollan argues that the therapeutic authority is derived from that no-edit quality we talked about.
The unshakable conviction that a truth has been disclosed.
Exactly. Even if the underlying neurobiology is chemical, the experience is psychologically profoundly real. And that reality is what drives lasting behavioral change.
The ultimate expression of this paradox is the cancer patient Dinah Baser.
A fantastic case study. An avowed atheist, she reported being bathed in God's love during her session.
Yet she emerged with her atheism fully intact.
Which seems like such a contradiction, but it perfectly illustrates the tension between profound experience and our interpretive framework.
So how does she explain it?
The experience of gratuitous, overwhelming love and grace was so powerful that it was unattributable to any worldly cause. As Pollan noted, God might have simply been the only word big enough in the language to convey the magnitude and authority of that feeling.
Even for someone who intellectually rejects the concept.
Right. The subjective reality was undeniable, even if the label she applied to it was provisional.
So looking forward, many of these researchers, they aren't just interested in curing the sick.
No, many are interested in the betterment of well people.
And they see medical acceptance as merely the first step toward broader cultural acceptance and supervised non-medical use.
Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, envisions that medical acceptance will lead to outright legalization, echoing the decriminalization strategies used for cannabis.
But others, like Bob Jesse and Catherine McLean, they envision more carefully controlled, alternative models for supervised use that exist outside the traditional medical clinic.
Right, like the idea of a longitudinal, multi-generational context.
Which is like, what, churches?
Essentially, yeah. Ceremonial gatherings or churches led by experienced elders, or mental health clubs.
Which Pollan describes as a cross between a spa or a retreat and a gym.
Right. A place where healthy individuals could occasionally seek out a high-dose experience in a safe, supportive environment designed to promote insight and creativity.
The overall implication is profound. Psychedelics offer a technology of consciousness that injects entropy, novelty, and disorganization into the rigid architecture of the adult mind.
It's a tool for breaking entrenched mental habits, fostering creative solutions, and cultivating what we can call neural diversity.
In a world that tends to reward conformity and low-risk thinking.
Exactly.
Ultimately, Pollan's research forces us to question our most fundamental assumptions about consciousness, the convergence of neurobiology, psychology, and spirituality. It all suggests that our everyday, waking consciousness is far from the whole picture.
It's what William James theorized long ago. Our ordinary utilitarian consciousness is but one special type of consciousness, with others available just beyond the filmiest of screens.
This deep dive really highlights the immense value of understanding this entire complex body of work, from the historical pioneers to the neurobiological mechanism of the DMN and the profound transformative changes reported by those who have taken the journey.
For a concise visual overview of these ideas, including the DMN, ego dissolution, and the therapeutic promise of psychedelics, see the mini explainer linked in the description for how to change your mind.